Well, when people are in such a dire situation, I think the response cannot be seen to be adequate within the time that we've had. I think there's a lot more that needs to be done. There are issues of access to these communities that we have faced. We have faced also issues in the allocation of land for putting up shelter. We have faced issues of lack of funding available to the humanitarian partners to be able to bring in assistance very quickly and rapidly. We have faced issues of communities who have been very averse to giving us access, and the level of discomfort that many of our humanitarian people feel when they go in to try to help the people in the Muslim areas, but they have to go through Arakan areas, and in some areas there is a level of discomfort that is expressed towards mainly the national staff, who then feel reluctant to be able to go back and help. So that is an issue of access that we have. The government has become better in terms of allowing us to go to many of the areas in Rakhine, but we still have administrative issues in terms of getting travel authorizations and visas on time. The government is working with us to try and address those bureaucratic delays, but it doesn't help in a situation where we need to respond urgently, where we have such delays. The number of Rakhine people who were displaced is far fewer than the number of Muslim people who have been displaced. What the government is trying to do is to try to rehabilitate the Rakhine people in the type of accommodation in which they were living earlier. And for the Muslim people also, the idea is at this moment, very few Muslims have gone back to the places from which they were displaced. For example, in Sitwe, all of the people that you see outside of Sitwe are not in Sitwe in the accommodation, so they are in temporary accommodations. Whereas the Rakhine people in Mongdao have gone back to more permanent accommodations of the type that they were living in earlier, and so the government facility that they have provided is certainly much better than the facility that has been provided to the people living in the temporary shelters. Even though they are of a more semi-permanent nature, they are still temporary shelters because those people we do not expect will live there in the long term, and those are the temporary shelters. So that accommodation for them is not the same. That's with regard to Sitwe. Sitwe people need to return back to the extent that they can to the city when the conditions allow. The root cause is certainly also the lack of economic and social development of Rakhine state as a whole, but also of the Muslim populations. These populations have not had adequate access to health services provided by the government, adequate access to education, adequate access to infrastructure, and certainly their freedom of movement has been constrained. So I think they need to have better economic opportunities, and they need these investments, but so do the other people in Rakhine state who are also very poor. This is the second poorest state in Myanmar. So there is an overall need for across the board investments for both communities in the state, and I think this should be assessed, and that there should be donor funding is required for this. So we do need a more medium to a longer term strategy and a plan of how we will address some of the root causes to lie in economic and social development of the state. Education is by far one of the most important elements that is required. Job opportunities for these people is required, and the government does talk to me and does tell me that they have a plan for the development of the state, but certainly resources will be needed. We are working simultaneously for a revision of the 1982 Act and the law that exists. But currently that is the only law that exists in the country with regard to citizenship, and any government applies the law that they have. Once they have applied that law, we will have to assess how many people would have qualified under that law, and then we would have to get engaged in the process of the revision of the 1982 Citizenship Act. Because fundamentally, everyone has a right to citizenship, and everyone's human rights must be protected. If we apply those two principles, then we believe it would automatically call for revisions of the Citizenship Act in due course. But currently, since there is a statute on the books, any government tries to implement that statute, and we have to see that that process is fair, that it is transparent, and that it is followed through due process, while we simultaneously continue to advocate on the revision of the 1982 Citizenship Act.